Turn my mic up. Eddie Yara, you tour movie. Tell them tanks on the ground. When I was there, the father raised me up, he raised me up. And all my sins, he never gave me up, no. And all my wrongs, really gave me up. They heard them tanks up on that ground, so he had to wreck them up. New tour, new tour, I don't be doing. Going with that toy, then we keep going, then we hey, new tour, yeah, it's good, I know he's great. Watch out what he got. When it ain't nobody knows the thoughts of it, believe I'm watching. They entertain the angels, but they don't understand. They stuck up in their pride, everybody wanna be the man. I'm surrounded by visions, like my tribe in the prison. That's a life, the jeweler, just like thighs on the ceiling. I'm waiting on the promises, eyes on the million. Tempted by money and love, break out your feelings. I speak that spirit cause I breathe that. New Torah movement, they might become the freedom. They see the tanks on the ground, they holler freedom. When I was there, the father raised me up, he raised me up. And all my sins, he never gave me up, no. And all my wrongs, really gave me up. They heard them tanks up on that ground, so he had to wreck them up. New Torah, I don't be doing. Going with that toy, then we keep going, hey, I put my life up on the line like a bitch, so they don't hear me, no. I get them hooked, I bet they feel me, though. They took my heart, I had the rhythm slow. Moving where the river go. No, this not a river boat. I just make them feel the flow. But I don't think they really know. Got all my hormones, got my sword, it's time to really go. They walking dead, man, this really go. Make you lose your head if you really know. Show about the really blow. Believe that, believe that. Get them my heart if you need that. Believe that, believe that. We never did, you know what we at. When I was there, the father raised me up, he raised me up. And all my sins, he never gave me up, no. And all my wrongs, really gave me up. They heard them tanks up on that ground, so he had to wreck them up. New Torah, I don't be doing. Going with that toy, then we keep going, then we hey, new Torah,
Shalom, 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 family. Giving all praises to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to our ancestors, to Yeshua, Mashiach, who showed us how to walk out the Torah circumspectly.
When I was there, the father raised me up, he raised me up. And all my sins, he never gave me up, and all my wrongs,
He has made us joint heirs with Him.
they heard them tanks up on that ground,
That He is our advocate.
Father, I don't be doing. Going with that toy,
come on in the building,
then we keep going, then we hey, new Torah, yeah, it's good, I know he's great. Watch out what he got.
this afternoon.
When it ain't nobody knows
We're not going to be before you long.
attention. They entertain the angels, but they don't understand. They stuck up in their pride. Everybody wanna be the man. I'm so surrounded by bitches, like my tribe in the prison. That's a life.
Three-part series, the end of this three-part series.
Waiting on the promise.
Dealing with occultism.
Tempted by money and love.
And the OAHSPE literature, quote unquote, the OAHSPE Bible. We want to talk about it. We got a special guest today. Woodson Payne, who is a walking survivor. Come on in the building, family.
And all my wrongs, take me young. Nigga, take up on that ground.
Great show lineup. Please hit that like button, like, share, subscribe. Let someone know you're on the air.
I put my life up on the line like a bitch, so they don't hear me, no. I get them hooked, I bet they hear me, though. They took my heart, I had to really slow. Moving where the river go. No, this not the river go. I just make them feel the flow. But I don't think they really go. Got on my hormones, got my sword, it's time to really go. They walking dead, and they with it, bro. Make it really fire. They really know. So about it really flow.
The KOT. Talk about the promises and the seed. Appreciate you, Sister Cassandra, for the work that you did on last season as well. Staying with us the whole time.
When I was here, the Father raised me up. And all my sins, He never gave me up. And all my wrongs, He gave me up. Nigga, them takes up on that ground.
Again, we got a special guest who's going to be sharing with us all this afternoon. Good brother Woodson Payne. This is going to be one. It's going to be one of the great ones. Look, be edified so that the Most High may be glorified. All praise. Come on in the building, family. You come on in. Y'all come on in. Again, we have a special guest in the building on today. Our good brother Woodson Payne is going to be sharing with us, who is an OAHSPE cult survivor. I'm going to introduce him briefly. And then I'm going to let him get started. He's gracious enough to allow for us to share in his story. And we're going to talk about a few different topics. We may or may not take some questions from him after the interview, but he has graced us on this panel today. And we're going to talk about some things. There are many different things that are out here in this world today. Many different things that exalts itself against the knowledge of Christ, which is that the Father in heaven is our salvation, and that there are many different things that would try to turn us as believers and as children of Israel and as children of the Father, to turn us away from Him, to turn us away from the light and to walk in darkness. The scripture admonishes us and tells us and teaches us that Satan himself has masqueraded at times as an angel of light. So oftentimes we hear things that sound good to the ear. They sound good to the ear. They're tantalizing. It sounds right. They use terms that we may be familiar with. They talk about love and they talk about Jehovah and they talk about this and they talk about that. And it sounds good to those, as we talked about on yesterday's lesson, to those who don't have real discernment. They don't have the Ruach Elohim or the Holy Spirit operating in their lives. And so because they don't have discernment, they're easily led astray. They're easily led astray. And so what we have been challenged to do is to deal with anything that will hinder us in our elevation, in our consciousness, in our thoughts, in connecting with the Father, and keeping that holies of holies we talked about. In the book of Matthew, it talks about that heaven. Christ talks about that heaven is within inside us. It is inside of us, right? And because it is inside of us, right, we talked about the mercy seat, the holies of holies, right? All of these things where the Most High is communicating with us, where we can meet him and where he meets us right at the point of our needs. And what we want to do on today, again, this is our conclusion to the 3-part series and dealing with the OAHSPE literature, dealing with the faithist movement, dealing with occultism. And again, I won't prolong the time. I'm going to bring on our good dear brother, WOODSON PAYNE, who has so graciously joined us. I was told that this is his second interview that he has been invited on. So I thank him again. I can't thank him enough for agreeing and allowing us to share a part of his story. So, brother WOODSON PAYNE, how are you today, brother? Peace and blessings. I think WOODSON, your mic might be muted.
Sorry about that.
All right. It's all right.
How you doing?
Pretty good, man. Pretty good, man. How about yourself?
Just fine. Thank you for inviting me on your program this morning.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I appreciate you for accepting our invitation. Again, you and I had, some exchange on the House of Consciousness on Sonetta's TV. Shout out to Sonetta for allowing that to take place. And I just wanted to continue that because as you were sharing, it was obvious, there were certain elements that really didn't want you. And I say it's all a strategy of Hashatan or Satan or the enemy or the adversary that does not want light shared in the dark, shared or spread in the dark spaces, right? And so I wanted you to, to come over to be able to share your story unfettered and unhindered, and so that the people that are listening may be edified, that we may be educated, that we may be built up in our faith and understand that everything that we hear. Paul talks about that there will come many false prophets. There will come many false prophets. There will come many divers and different various temptations and things that sound good to the people. And what we need to do is, and we talked about on this channel again yesterday, we talked about having the spirit of discernment, right? And operating in the spirit of discernment. And that is one thing that will help keep us out of the snares of the enemy by following the Holy Spirit, who is our teacher, our comforter, our parakletos, right? And so we wanted to just bring you on. And so I'm going to let you go in, brother. And if you can, just give us some background in regards to your different experiences and how even you came about getting involved with specifically the OAHSPE movement, and then just we're going to talk about more occultism and different things like that, and sort of the beginnings of the movements of it that sort of took place really around circa the 1800s or so, mid 1800s and later on.
Right.
up at this point. So if you can, brother, the floor is yours.
All right, I'm just going to give you a short synopsis of my experience, and we can go from there. But basically, I grew up in an OAHSPE household. My father was a student of OAHSPE. My grandfather was also a student of OAHSPE. So it wasn't really something I knew about until I was 13 when somebody gave me my grandfather's OAHSPE Bible. So, but we did grow up as vegetarians, and my parents were pacifists. They didn't believe in being involved in war. And so by the time I was 17 or 18, and kind of meddling in reading OAHSPE, it's a very confusing book, but I when I was probably 18, I started getting a newsletter from somebody on the West Coast. And so by the time I was 20, this person was preaching a doomsday scenario. And so I got recruited into this OAHSPE Bible cult in Southern California. And I stayed in this group for 2 solid years. And the OAHSPE Bible cult leader, I'm going to say straight out, was a tyrant. And she wasn't a tyrant when we first got there. She was this very nice housewife. But over time, the pressure and the coercion and the sleep deprivation and the poor diet and everything took its toll on all the members. And, you know, everybody's suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder at the end of 2 years. And we had 24 people there that were students of OAHSPE. And she had this very elaborate recruiting scheme that she claimed she had an endless supply of money and that she was buying a 747 aircraft to travel around the world and preach OAHSPE. Well, it was all a pipe dream of a schizophrenic housewife that never got any treatment for her mental illness, but it was parading as spiritual enlightenment, this whole diatribe that she was selling us. So at the end of 2 years, you know, I finally put 2 and 2 together at a quiet time where I had time to think and realized that I didn't really know the word cult, but I knew that the leader was insane and I had to get out of there. So I escaped, and it's a long story, but I went back to Texas, is where I'm from, and got a job just like anybody else, and kind of struggled through for a decade, living in fear of this group because this lady had put curses on everybody. And so after about 10 years, I was able to go out in public and socialize and have friends and this stuff. But that first 10 years was very rough and very isolated because you're living in fear of this cult, this OAHSPE Bible cult. And so finally I, you know, developed a career and went along fine. And in the late 80s, this is almost 20 years later, I had an emotional crisis. I broke up with a girlfriend and I started reading the Bible and Masonic Bibles. And somehow I dug up an OAHSPE Bible and started reading that. Well, in a very short order, I got recruited into another OAHSPE Bible cult. But this was a family cult that was my girlfriend at that time and her parents, but they were connected to a nationwide OAHSPE Bible cult. And that was another traumatic experience where I was going to, at the end of 5 years of all this extreme madness going on with these people, I walked out of this group and went back to college and kind of soldiered on. So by 1995, the internet comes along, and I'm still trying to piece together my life and understand what happened to me. So I started researching OAHSPE Bible and this whole faithist phenomenon. And so I spent about 30 years from 1995 to right now researching this group. I've collaborated since 2016 with another gentleman in Japan who's an American engineer on a OAHSPE Bible history project. And I've just been a research fellow on that project since 2016. So here we are today. I've was interviewed in Georgia about 2 years ago about cults in general and how they operate. And so this is my second interview, and here we are.
Man, awesome, man. And I can't thank you enough for taking the time out of your day to share the knowledge and your experience in dealing with this particular cult and your understanding of occultism. And again, like I said, the information that is out there that you can almost even find what you can even find in regards to this cult. Every piece of information that I was able to find on it that I could verify, by the end of that research, I could almost find it confirmed in some of the work that you had already shared on social media platforms, and so again, from what I can tell, you're probably the foremost authority on dealing with the WASPy faithist movement, especially in regards to the inner workings and the ins and outs of it. And again, and so what I would like to do next is really talk to you about. You made a comment or a statement that that the first WASPy cult that you were involved in was headed by a woman. It was headed by a woman.
That's correct.
Yeah. And so I think that's one of the things that, in a lot of these spaces, people don't necessarily see women that are really involved in these heavy occultic movements. I had a young lady that I've been acquainted with for some number of years, who has since moved out to the California area. And when she told me when she moved to the California area, that somehow when she took her sons with her, that somehow they became ensnared in a cult in California that was so extremely huge and powerful, that was headed by a woman. And I believe they thought she was some type of reincarnation of some type of Hindu goddess or Indian goddess or something like that. And she was really concerned about her sons and about her children. And it was very difficult for her to really pull her son out of this cult that was going on in California. And I don't know if it still is at this point, but she did give me the name of it. I'm going to try to remember that by the end of this show. But again, I think that oftentimes when people talk about cult leaders, I think they have this sort of immediate image of Jim Jones or David Koresh or something of that nature, right? Or the Heaven Gates cult leader or something like that, where women are not so necessarily at the forefront. But it's these things that I think we have to be very cognizant of. So I think that was a very interesting point that you came up with. And so then moving on, you talked about that after that, you got in, after coming out of that particular cult, you got involved in with another OAHSPE type of cult. And I think that people don't realize how difficult or how deceptive and how controlling these things can be, especially when the constant, no matter which leader you go to or you find, if they're using the same literature, especially what you're familiar with, right? That it's easy to be trapped in these things. And so I can see how, one can come out of one situation and then find themselves back into almost the same situation again because of the mental and the mind control. Can you talk about that just a little bit more?
Yeah, there's a definite recruiting process, and when you meet these people, they're very friendly and they're like love bombing you and complimenting you and telling you how smart you are, and at the same time, and usually they're usually trying to recruit people that have already read OAHSPE. So you have this false conception that these people are friendly, that they're representing themselves as they appear, that there's nothing going on behind the scenes that they're trying to recruit you into. So you're coming into this as you're joining some friends, some OAHSPE Bible students, but OAHSPE is just kind of the first step where you pretty much inculcate yourself into this religion, and then some really manipulative person comes along and he kind of reels you in with his rod and reel into his orbit, and then through different types of mind control techniques and either love bombing you or putting you down constantly. It's either love bombing or putting you down because you're not good enough, that you're all of a sudden you want to be in the group, and you want this person to stop bad mouthing you and accept you as this person that when you first joined and you were so smart and everything. So it's a game that they're playing, and that's a whole nother science of how that recruiting process works. But once you're in, you're pretty much cut off from society and you have no financial way to get out. You're locked in there. And sometimes recruits, OAHSPE Bible recruits, are cut off from their family, they're cut off from friends, and you have no access to the internet, you're cut off from television, you're cut off from reading any other book except OAHSPE. So you're so isolated, you're pretty much trapped in that environment, and you cannot mentally figure out a way to get out because you've been on a very strict vegetarian diet for a couple of years, and then all of a sudden your brain's not able to process this information, and all this time you're questioning the leader is jacking you up and ripping you a new one, and it's just you're at some point you're trying to avoid the leader in your group. When you're in this group, you're trying to avoid the leader and her wrath or his wrath at all cost, and you're just trying to lay low and survive. So it's a very dynamic psychological phenomenon that's going on, and it takes a lot of self-reflection and protein to figure out what's going on and get yourself out of it. A lot of people are not able to do that, and some people have to get family and friends involved and do an intervention to get these people out because they're so indoctrinated into this. So it's a very dangerous situation to be in some cases. Other cases, it may be a benign group that just wants to get together and pray for Aunt Edna to get over her breast cancer or something. But there are some heavy duty groups out there that are really coercive.
Yeah. And so I want to say that I want to bring up a question that one of our sisters posted in the chat. But I understand that in the didactic literature of the WOAHSPE, that there is a emphasis on this practice of vegetarianism.
Correct.
Would you say, other than what most people would simply look at that as a way to or a line to better health, but would you say that it's something that has been used to a degree to sort of break down the will of the followers of the people?
Yeah, it can be if it's an extreme vegan diet. The first group I was in, I was on a bran muffin and a little 6-ounce cup of canned orange juice a day. That was it. It turns out to be about 60 to 70 calories. So when you have no protein, your brain shuts down and you're pretty much will believe anything anybody says. And it's hard to really figure out what's going on and get yourself out of that situation. The other thing they use is sleep deprivation. They keep you up. They're having meetings. They're having sing-alongs. They're constantly indoctrinating you. What about this chapter? What about this chapter? And so in OAHSPE said this, and so said that. And you know, it's just a constant, nonstop barrage on your brain of these different. It's called whataboutism. You know, what about this chapter? What about this chapter? So it's the vegetarian diet. If it includes eggs, perhaps dairy, cheese, that stuff, it doesn't have the same effect as a vegan diet, where over time you're not getting any protein to the brain, and the brain kind of shuts down.
Yeah. Again, can you go into our sister, one of our sisters in the chat, Sister Cassandra Mesa, peace and blessings to you, sis. She wanted to sort of see if you can go in just briefly. Are you aware of how many different factions of this the faith that are within the faithist movement that sort of have this OAHSPE literature as their foundation?
Well, there's not a lot of groups. There's one group in the Bronx. There's one person. I don't know if he has a group with him in the South. There's one in Oregon. Right at the moment, there are no like communal groups except in Oregon. That's a very small one in Oregon. And you have to remember that a whole generation of these OAHSPE students has died off in the last 20 years. So it used to be a big movement in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. But during that time, all of those people have died off. So back in the late 80s, they had Universal Faithists of Cosman Church, which at its peak probably had 100 members across the country. And of that, they would get together every summer for a summer conference and stuff. And they would spend a week. They would spend a week in a hotel room at some resort doing exactly the same thing they always do. What about this chapter? And what about this chapter? And what did Moses do here? You know, they're just self-bombarding each other with indoctrination about OAHSPE. You know, here they are at a huge lakeside resort in the mountains, and they spend 24/7 inside this, say, a ski lodge, hammering out this chapter and that chapter from OAHSPE. It's just a bombardment of information. So what was your question again? Sorry.
Yeah, no, we just wanted to to just briefly discuss the many different factions of.
Yeah, so there was a universal faces of Cosman that everybody has died off from that group, so they're no longer in existence. Period. There are one or two people from that whole organization that are still alive, but that one is gone. So whether there is or not any, there's one church in the Bronx that has a small gathering of people, and I don't know that much about it. You might want to interview somebody else from there, but that's about it. I know of no large groups of, there's a lot of people on the internet spiking the ball and touting up OAHSPE as this, that, and the other, but there's only one group in that's a communal group in Oregon, and I don't hear good things about that one too, but I don't know what they're I don't know that they're a doomsday cult.
Understood.
Yeah.
Understood. And I will say this: I don't think every cult, is follows the the doomsday cult, UFO sighting, Haley Comet sighting, as we saw with the Heaven's Gate cult and different things of that nature, and other various cults that we've seen and that some of us are most familiar with. But I did want to also talk about the OAHSPE, its literature in and of itself. There are a lot of things that and I will say this, I have not read the entire text. It's a very large text. So I have not read the entire text. But as in the Torah, in the scripture, it teaches us that even a little leaven leavens the whole lump, right? And so if you provide me a text, and within that text, there is clearly, from what I see, symbolisms and references to things that are aligned with scientific racism of the day, which we know was prevalent.
Absolutely.
During that time. And I can almost immediately see it, especially in the presentation that I gave the other night. When you go into I believe it's the first book of the Lord's, the first 3 chapters, it begins to talk about the various creations of beings, the Ains, if I'm saying this correctly,
right.
Is in the Drooks, and the Yaks as well. I believe there was also another race, I believe, that was referred to or would have been considered as the Adamic race that apparently died off, or something like that within the text. But in regards to scientific racism, if you're familiar with that and what that is, can you tell me how, in your experience, in the number of decades that you've actually studied the OAHSPE, how you can see the scientific racism is prevalent in its writing and in its inception?
Yeah, that's a big subject. First of all, I want to say that in talking to OAHSPE students and discussing this and that chapter in OAHSPE, that's called going down the rabbit hole. There's a whole group of people in many hundreds of different cults, not even related to OAHSPE, that have got into debates with people and got into their literature trying to disprove it, and they end up recruiting themselves. So there is a danger of like trying to rationalize or disprove something in OAHSPE. You can recruit yourself. Just you have a low moment, and then you say, "Oh, this makes sense." But scientific racism, I didn't know anything about it until a couple of years ago. So at that point, I went back and started looking through OAHSPE, and the whole premise of the book is based on scientific racism. And I know if you're familiar with the parts in the Old Testament about a group of, I think it was the Shem, or one of the sons of Noah was turned a different color because he committed some sin.
Yes.
Yeah.
I understand you're referring to that would be Cain, right? Cain was
no, it wasn't Cain. It was.
Oh, you're talking about he was turned a different color. That was Canaan, right?
It was the Ham.
Ham.
It was
Yes.
Ham. So
Yes.
from that Old
Yeah.
Testament story came in the 1800s or late 1700s came the Hamitic
hypothesis. Yeah, the Hamitic hypothesis.
So the Hamitic hypothesis was scientific race. Some really astute white racists took that story, and this hypothesis came about when the colonizers in Africa started to realize that, hey, Africa has some very great natural resources that we could exploit. And so over time, the Hamitic hypothesis turned from one of Noah's, I think Noah's grandson, turning black to Canaan. Now they flipped it. They flipped the story and said, no, there's some white people that live in Africa. And these explorers kept coming back from Africa with stories that, yeah, they're seeing these white tribes in Africa. Well, this was all a scam, just a barefaced scam to try and say that, well, anything that was created a civilization in Africa was created by these white tribes, not the black tribes, but the white tribes. So it was a very engineered way of saying that, hey, look, all these resources, all these mineral resources in Africa were, discovered by white people. And since we're white European colonizers, we have a right to those minerals. That's the basic story. So when you go to OAHSPE, the whole thing of OAHSPE is scientific racism. They took an Old Testament story of Noah and the flood, and they took them out of the story takes it out of Israel, puts it in a mysterious land of Atlantis in the Pacific Ocean. This is not their term, but anyway, right. There's all of these degenerate peoples that they have to get rid of. So God kills them all off, and they sink this continent, and all the faithists, IHENs, escape to 15 places around the world, and that was a beginning of civilization. But all these IHENs, if you look at it, they're saying they were white and yellow. They had long blonde hair.
Thanks. Absolutely.
So it can't get any more racist than that. So
it can't get any more racist than that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, so the story that OAHSPE puts forth is that all these mound builders, the original mound builders, were the descendants of this lost tribe of white people that escaped the flood. So it's only after they got here they intermarried with the local indigenous population, and they created all these different races. Well, the whole story is just a BS story. It's so racist. It's just glaring when you finally realize what this Bible is teaching. It's just the most racist thing you can ever believe. And I'll just wrap this stuff up really quick. But, this story that's in OAHSPE was around 40, 50, 60 years before OAHSPE was ever written, because they used the white colonizers used a similar mythology to justify the confiscation of Native American lands in southern Georgia. And then it's, all of a sudden in 1830, President Jackson initiates the Indian Removal Act, and all Indians east of the Mississippi were shipped off to Oklahoma. So that story that's in OAHSPE was just a rehash of an earlier false narrative that was a real thing that affected thousands upon thousands of Native Americans, and maybe 10,000 Cherokee, 8 to 10,000 died in this mass migration in 1830 to 1837, where they evicted people off their property in Georgia and other eastern states at gunpoint in the dead of winter, and death marched them to Oklahoma. So when you realize what's going on in OAHSPE, you realize it's the whole thing is the scientific racism. This whole story is just repeating something that happened in our history back in 1828 to 1837. So it's a huge story. I couldn't go into it now to flush it all out, but it's scientific racism with a PhD. It's just a big load of spaghetti that they're trying to sell you. But
absolutely, and I agree. And as a historian myself, and a teacher, and understanding these particular subjects, as I began to read just through the various chapters to begin just to study, to put together a presentation, it just jumped out at the pages of me. I said, wow, I clearly see what this is. And one thing you have to do when you start reading this type of didactic literature, you have to look at the political climate at the time that these things
exactly.
are written. You have to look at the material culture of the people at the time these things are written, the politics, what's going on around it, the religious movements that are going on around it during these particular times. We often talk about on this particular channel how you even study the Torah, how you even study the biblical narrative, right? You have to have a full understanding of grasp what's going on in the world at the time, because a lot of things, a lot of idioms that are being used, a lot of references that are being made, you really won't understand them unless you understand the world as men walked it and lived it at that time. And so I think this segues us, it's a good segue to talk about the theosophical movement, the creation of theosophy, I should say, theosophy,
right.
and Madame
Blavatsky.
Yeah, I think that's important, and then talk about the Fox sisters as well. I think this is a good segment to sort of get into that, and also how this ties in, connecting scientific racism of the time and the relationship that we see with the with John Bellows Newsbro with Madame Blavatsky, and the relationship with her and the influence of the Fox sisters as well, and who they are. If you can touch on that for us as well.
Well, let's just start with the Fox sisters. So that's 1849, according to Cosmo Cal. I thought it was 1848, but these were just kids that started out pulling tricks on their mother, and they were figured out a way to pop their toe while they had their foot on a wooden floor, and it resonated through the house, a wooden house. And so people were sold the idea that you could talk to the dead by communicating through knocks. It'd be 1 for yes and 2 for no. And it started like that. It was just a joke among kids, two sisters. And you have to remember the time that the Fox sisters were living was in a few years, we had the Civil War, and just about every family east of the Mississippi had lost somebody in their family during the Civil War. So when somebody comes along and says, hey, you know, you can go in a seance and talk to Uncle Benny or Aunt Ida, some people were all for it. Not everybody thought it was possible. Some people were skeptical, but some people that were missing their relatives, or their relatives had died off in some strange way or something, they wanted to talk to them. And there was a ready cadre of people that were willing to take advantage of them and charge them money to talk to their dead relative. And this went on to from 1848 to 1888. So you have to remember that Newborough came along in 1881. This is just a few years after the Civil War. And this Fox Sisters spirit communication is already established. And these two girls and their aunt are traveling out, back and forth between the US and Europe, doing these stage shows, you know, Talk to the Dead stage show. So this is when Newborough came along, and actually he was a skeptic of spiritualism for some 15 years. And then in, I think it was 1877, Madame Blavatsky all of a sudden comes up with this, I think it was a Secret Doctrine or Isis Unveiled. I forget the exact one that was first. But she had gotten a whole bunch of manuscripts from somebody that had passed away. And this guy, before he died, he said, if you'll make sure I'm cremated, I'll give you all these exotic manuscripts that I've written. So all of a sudden, there was a race to, after her first book, then all of these other con artists were in a race to produce some other book that was channeled through the spirits. And Newborough just happened to be the one to throw something together. But, you know, his story is kind of shaky of how he wrote OAHSPE, and he never allowed any questions about the writing of it, or he would just throw a fit and throw people out of his house when he first published OAHSPE. So, but this was the time we were living in. People were, instead of talking to their dead relatives, now they were Blavatsky was talking to high-ranged avatars and spiritual teachers. You know, it's all a made-up thing, but people went for it. And so Newborough comes along, and he goes one further and says, well, there's a whole federation of these angels that govern the universe, and here it is in this book. They came and talked to me, you know. And so that's, you know, that's how it got started. But unfortunately, a lot of people got recruited in 1882, 1883 into a group that finally went to New Mexico. It sounds very like a ideal situation where you live in this utopia and you've got God's prophet and all this stuff. Well, the Newborough was very abusive to these people. And once you got there, you had to turn all your property over to Newborough, which meant cash. And if you own property, you turned that over to his cohort, Andrew Howland. You signed over your lease, you signed over your mortgage to your farm to Howland. So they were running a real estate scam there, taking cash. Newborough got the cash, and Howland got the people's farms. So when people would ask, how come Howland, who was a multimillionaire, doesn't have to turn all of his things over to the colony? And Newborough would say, well, he's not consecrated, so as soon as he becomes consecrated, he'll turn over everything. Well, actually what was happening was John Newborough was going through a divorce, and he didn't want to own anything, so he was delaying anybody taking possession of this colony of people until his divorce was over. So when there was a rebellion at that colony in 1885 where people found out about this scam because Newborough was saying, oh, the property is held in a communal corporation and the paperwork is at the courthouse in a secret file. Well, there's no secret files at the courthouse. Everything's available for viewing. You just go talk to the county clerk. And so they, some really sharp people that lived there put two and two together, figured out that Newborough was running a scam and that the property belonged to Howland, Andrew Howland, Newborough's partner. And they, as soon as the word got out through the colony, now bear in mind, there's only 41 people there. There's not 4,400, not 10,000. There's 41 adults and children. So overnight, Newborough evicted all of these, about 20 people, families with children, off the property. So these people ended up in Las Cruces trying to get back to their homes with no money. He didn't give them any money. They had turned all over, you know, one guy, Ellis, turned over $10,000 in cash to Newborough, and his son turned over $600. And they, when they were thrown off the property or evicted, they had no money. And so they're stranded in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and they can't get back to anywhere. And there was a big fight there between Ellis and Newborough. Ellis said, you have to sign that property back over to me. And Newborough and Howland were saying, well, give us 2 weeks, we'll figure it out. And he said, no, you figure it out now. And he says, well, give us 1 day and we'll figure it out. And he said, no, you sign it over right now. He says, well, give us a couple of hours. And he said, no, you sign it over right now or there's going to be hell to pay. So Newborough relented. He signed over the property to Ellis and gave the $600 back to his son. He didn't get his $10,000 back. He got about $1,200 back through the courts. And they left the colony along with 18 other people. And within a year, Ellis and 2 other families had established a growing vegetable, a successful vegetable farm in Las Cruces, and was doing great, supplying vegetables to groceries, where Newborough couldn't grow a weed on that property in the whole time he was there until the time he died. You know, everything died over there. And so it's a very complicated story. And, you know, I can't touch on all of the stuff that went on, but you have to remember this is a time where we're right after the Civil War. People are still in mourning for their loved ones who died in the Civil War. And here comes the Fox sisters. Oh, we can talk to Mama, and we can talk to Daddy, and we can talk to Brother Bob. And so this was the time we lived in, or they lived in. And so here comes Newborough and Blavatsky. Well, Blavatsky's channeling all these ancient masters, and Newborough just does her one better and said, oh, here's the whole universe. Here's how the whole thing works. And so it's a long, convoluted story, but when you read OAHSPE, if you know what scientific racism, it's very blaringly evident that this is a racist book written by somebody that was either a white European or a white American with a very racist viewpoint. It's not evident when you pick it up, but I had no idea that what was going on until I started studying scientific racism. And then all of a sudden, all the lights went off. All the glaring red lights on the WOSPE is just, oh, this thing is the most racist thing I've ever come across.
And I think that it's clear and it's evident. And so there are certain things that I always take exception to, that raises red flags with me. When you always hear people talk about, let's not talk about the foundation. Let's not talk about how the literature came about. Let's not question, as you said, the same type of resistance that many met with Newsbro in regards to how the writing came about, the same resistance and the same anger and the same frustrations that he showed when being questioned about it. We still see that same thing today. Anytime we question anyone about the foundation of the author, the things that come from the mind of the author of this the OAHSPE literature, and they only want to drag you further into, well, have you read the book? That seems to be their defense, because they know the book is extensive. And as I'm talking to those that I found familiar with the community, they have not read the book in totality. Because
well, it's a confusing mishmash of stuff. And
yeah,
it's what I've noticed since 2016, since I've been online discussing the same subject with the WOSPE students, is here's the number one thing I've noticed is that once you catch them on something that's doesn't make sense in a WOSPE, they immediately change the subject and say, what about, I know, yeah, okay, I see that, but what about this? You know,
right.
And they're often running, and that's kind of how you survive in that mindset. Is something that causes you discomfort, you just ignore and you go on to something else. And this constant hammering at you, I mean, my experience is that you just get hammered with this chapter and this chapter, and what about this and what about that, and you have no time to think. And before you can formulate an answer, they're on to something else, and it's what about this what about that, and you can never pin them down on an answer for something that's uncomfortable for them. They're always changing the subject. Every time you catch them on something, they want to change the subject. And you know, I occasionally talk to these people, you know, have a normal conversation. I wish them a happy Thanksgiving and hope you're doing well, hope your family's well. You know, I hope this rainstorm doesn't wash you away. You know, I do have some contact with these people, but when it comes on to the topic of a WOSPE, it's like, I'll be honest. When I first started, I ran into Sela Salom, and I think he's a great person. He needs some guidance. I'm saying that facetiously, but you know, he's one that's a very strong WOSPE proponent. And when I first met him, I couldn't get his attention, so I called him every name in the book. I'm sorry, I apologize, but I tried to get his attention and I couldn't. So I just read him the riot act and just bombarded him with 4-letter words and anything I could do to make him mad and give me some attention to talk to him. But over time, I see that he's more indoctrinated in this than perhaps the cult leader I knew. So he's devoted so much of his life to this effort that it's hard to even talk to him and say, what about this chapter? What about this thing? Because as soon as it's something he doesn't like, he's on to something else. He's changing the subject. And at some point I just gave up, tried to be his friend. You know, he's asked me to do an interview, and I'm going to do that whenever he's ready. I think he's a good person down inside. I don't think he's evil. I don't think he's the devil. But he's just a little misguided. But I think I have all respect for him. Cosmic Cow, same way. I have respect for these people because I used to be just like them. I was never proselytizing OAHSPE, you know, out on the street, yelling at people. But I used to be one of them, and I know where they're coming from, and I have a obligation to try and gets them straightened out. Maybe that's a death wish. I don't know. But it's just,
Sure.
I have all respect for Silas Salome. He's trying to do the best he can at selling this story. Cosm and Kyle, all due respect to these people. We all have the right to believe whatever we want to believe. If you want to believe the moon is made out of cheese, go for it. I don't really care. But a WASPE Bible is something that really damages people and really will mess up your life. It'll break up your family. It'll break up your marriage. It'll destroy your relationship with your children. It's an extremist ideology that, it has a real trail of tears behind it of broken families. And I'm one of them, so it all sounds good when you first hear it, but when you get involved in it and somebody starts hammering on you for months on end about this chapter and that chapter, it all of a sudden it starts having an effect on your psychological well-being. And that's what a lot of people maybe don't understand. They hear something about a WASPE and it's a channeled book, wada. But when somebody's hammering that book on you night and day, and you're on a strict vegan diet, your brain shuts down, all this stuff becomes real to you out of fear, not out of love, out of fear. And somebody said a long time ago, there's no love in a WASPE. It's only retribution, and it's,
Wow.
there's no love there. It's just all about this chapter and that chapter. And it's been taken to the extreme now because of the internet. It used to be people might find it in a bookstore and read it themselves and they're okay somewhat. But the minute you get into a group with a very strong leader, he's going to start pounding you with a WASPE. You're already putty in their hands because you accept the WASPE, but then he's going to pound on you and he says, well, if you'll just turn over your decision making to me, I'll let you know all this stuff that the creator has told me since I read a WASPE. It's another secret thing besides a WASPE, and here goes the whammy story again. It starts all over again. And you're just, it's just like he throws out a line to you and with some bait on it, and he just starts reeling you in because people can't resist a good story, So it can really damage somebody psychologically, really can.
Wow. Yeah. I agree with that. And I want to segue, if I may, into some of your understanding of the foundational tenets of the WASPE, especially in regards to these quote unquote angelic like or angel like beings. And in my presentation, I brought out the many different paintings that are not often talked about when we're hearing from these people, and how that's really almost as significant as the didactic literature of the WASPE itself, because it shows the imagery in the mind of Newsbro as he's creating these basic tenets of the WASPEs, as he's being told not just to what to write or what to type as he purports, but also what to paint. And specifically in regards to one of the most famous, I would say, paintings by Newsbro that's referenced as the painting of the three worlds, if I'm saying that correctly.
Is that on your screen now?
Yeah, it's on my screen now. Yeah. Are you familiar with that particular painting, the iconography?
Yeah. It's you have to remember that in the time we lived in, there was a big split between Freemasonry and the Catholic Church. And a lot of people that in Europe that were in Freemasonry were thrown out of the Catholic Church repeatedly. Right now in Britain, you can't be a member of Parliament and be a Mason, a Freemason. So there's a lot of schisms here and there. And my interpretation of this painting is, it was really shocking when I first saw it, all these different symbols. And but this is just a representation of the schism between Freemasonry and the Catholic Church. And Newborough, sprinkled all throughout OAHSPE, is this hatred for Catholicism. And he even paints that there's a real Jesus that's part of OAHSPE, part of the OAHSPE Bible, and then there's a false Jesus in heaven that was part of the founder of the Christian religion. And he paints his Jesus as, you know, descendant from the Old Testament, and he paints this false Louis Mong, who's the guy with the cape there and the sword, as a false god in heaven. And every religion, according to Newborough, is a false god in heaven. And this is just his rant on the Christian religion, and specifically the Catholic Church, because all these skeletons in the bottom, if you really look at that, those are, they all have a white collar on. These all these skeletons, they have a white collar of a Catholic cleric. So and there's in the bottom there's a broken papal symbol there next to that tiger or whatever that is. And there's some other symbols that probably representing House of Israel, and I don't know what the other stuff is. But you know, at some point, you don't, that's one of those things that are uncomfortable for them to talk about. And that's when you bring this up, it's time to change the subject. What about this chapter?
Absolutely.
Yeah, but in a nutshell, this is and you have to remember, this painting was done in New Mexico long after OAHSPE was written. He had a studio there, and he painted all the prophets, and he painted this thing, and God knows what else. Yeah, well, that's what Blavatsky was doing. She was in some of her books. She has, prior to OAHSPE written, she has pictures of these high-ranged, high beings, these super prophets, you know, that she was promoting. So he came along, he did the exact same thing that Blavatsky was doing. And if you look at the picture of Zarathustra, it resembles almost exactly the picture that Blavatsky had in one of her books prior to 1881. So Newborough is just emulating Blavatsky in this, showing these so-called prophets. But even if you look into the real history of some of these prophets, some of them were warlords. So
absolutely,
don't go there if you're easily disturbed by things, because the one they have for Chin, CHIN, was
I have that here.
Chinese warlord, and he killed thousands and thousands of people, probably millions of people, slaughtered on the battlefield. So I don't think there's this is, when you present this to somebody associated with OAHSPE, here again, they want to change the subject. So it's uncomfortable to talk about it when they find out that, you know, what Newborough said is a lie. So, you know, that's about all I want to say about that. But it's just that first painting that you showed, that's Newborough's representation of his battle with the Catholic Church, because he was a Freemason. He was a 33rd degree Mason, which 33rd degree is honorary. So anybody with money got that degree.
Sure, absolutely. And also, so again, I wanted to again talk about more of its foundational the foundational concepts of the OAHSPE and how it relates to this sort of overly encapsulating, or this overly need to collect hundreds and thousands of children. And what's the message that is in that we know that Newsboro had many of these drop-off centers. He had one in Chicago. I think he was at the one in New Orleans. That one was in Philadelphia. I believe they had one in Texas or something like that. But these drop-off centers, I would say, and when I say centers, I mean like homes or points of contact where people can just come and drop off their children. What was that about?
Well, in my research, they had 8, agents that would go into cities like Kansas City and go talk to the Catholic Church clergy and ask if there's any unwed mothers that have a baby that they want to conveniently get rid of. And so they would pick up a couple of babies there. When they had the big rebellion in New Mexico in 1885, and half the people were thrown off the thing. Well, James Ellis sues Newboro in Donna Ana Municipal Court, or Superior Court, just the county courthouse. He files a suit. So what does Newboro do? He skips town and shows up in New Orleans, rents a house to do just that, receive babies and then take them to New Mexico. Now, if he had another houses in Chicago or New York or Detroit or Kansas City, it wouldn't surprise me. I haven't heard of them, but I do have pictures of the house in New Orleans that was a children's drop-off. They just had a big foyer, and they just had a sign, "We take babies," and people would, unwed mothers just come and drop off a basket at 9 o'clock at night, and at 9:10 they'd look out before they go to bed, and hey, there's a baby there, so they bring it in. So but here again, you have to remember the time we were living in. There's a whole phenomenon called these train children, where they would dress up children from New York City. There was a huge population of orphans in New York City after the Civil War. So these kids were living on the street in the summer and the winter, and just trying to look out for themselves, little kids. And so what the New York government did is they dressed them up in clean clothes, and they would put 20 children on a train, and they would just send that train to the end of the line. And there would be farmers and their wives and little townspeople would meet the trains. And here's a boy and a girl, 5 years old, and they would adopt them right there on the spot, take them to their home, give them a home, a loving family. Well, rather than that, Newboro had this idea of having these orphanages. Well, we all know that the orphanages turned out to be a horrible experience for children, and they grew up being criminals mostly. What happened to these children is they were adopted through some intermediary, and no record whatsoever was kept of who their parents were, or who their mother was, where they came from, or anything. So that was just wiped clean. Whoever the agent was for Newboro just handed them off at a train station. Newboro would pick him up with a couple of ladies, and they'd have 10 children in diapers going back to Las Cruces. When they got there, they gave them brand new names out of OAHSPE. So they just completely wiped their family history clean. So if the kid grew up to be 10 years old and decided, well, I want to go back to my family, I got to get out of here. Well, they had no idea where they're going, so they're trapped there. They have no idea who their family was, what city they came from, who their parents were, anything. They were cut off from all connection to family. And that's what Nubero was doing. He was erasing their past so they couldn't leave. And you have to remember that there was a huge population of orphans in the large cities, and you know, the authorities were trying to do it in a proper way by having a family adopt a kid or two kids at a train station. That's how it worked. And there's videos today of these survivors of those train children. I'll get you the information if you want to read it, but these kids were cut off. And what you have to understand is when all the boys became 10, 11, or 12, they ran away. They never came back. The girls were trapped there. And what was happening was some reporters came back and said, well, they don't believe in marriage, but there sure is a lot of unwed mothers there that have children on the farm. So I'm sure these older males were abusing these little girls. And, you know, at 12 or 13 or 14 years old, they were having kids. So it's not all this rosy picture of, you know, adopting orphans. There was something going on, and it's, I haven't gotten to the bottom of it, but I do know that they were just completely cut off from society, and they had nowhere to go. If they knew, they had nowhere to get there, and they didn't know where they were going. So they were just locked into this system that they couldn't control, or that was controlled by a tyrant.
Wow. Really interesting. And again, it sort of reminds me, as one of our persons in the chat, Curse of Hammurabi, says, he says it seems like it was a breeding farm. And so that kind of leads me to this question: how does Newsbro sort of take this understanding of gathering all of these orphan children, wiping away their past, and is it some foundational teaching within the OAHSPE, I would say, in regards to the understanding of creating this new world order that I believe he looked towards or wanted to try to bring about? Is there some type of possibility that this is what he was trying to foster to a degree?
A new world order, yes. Basically a worldwide caliphate based on OAHSPE. But you have to remember, they were in New York City and they were in New York State at several points in their early history, and they had no response from adults. And so they gave up on trying to recruit adults into this OAHSPE group that Nubero was starting. And so at some point they decided, screw it, we're just going to adopt babies and we'll raise them up in an OAHSPE colony away from the world. And this is how we're going to restart mankind, because everything in the world is evil, and we can raise them without alcohol and drugs and all this other stuff, and they'll be pure. It's kind of predating Nazi race ideology, where they're going to raise up this pure race of vegetarians. So it has a really dark side to it when you get into it, and a lot of early members of Nubero's group were very highly educated people, and they were, by 1910, 1908, they were preaching OAHSPE and eugenics. So you know where all that eugenics ideology went. That went to Germany, and that became the basis of euthanasia of disabled people. They killed about 300,000 people with this eugenics program in Germany. So you know, that once you get into the background of what happened, it's a very dark and disturbing world that they were trying to establish. And
Sure.
other people took their ideas and ran with it and just became butchers, you know. But if you look back at the turn of the century, there was people that knew Newborough that were into eugenics, teaching eugenics, and this idea of a pure race. Well, I don't know if they got it from. I don't think there. Some of the eugenics authors are predate OAHSPE, but pretty soon the WASPE fanatics picked up that ideology because it matched with Newborough's ideal of creating a new race of pure people, you know.
Right. And would you venture to say that it is those ideas that found its way into the OAHSPE literature to a degree in order to support that particular ideology?
Yeah. So Blavatsky already had that ideology of a pure, you know,
That's
growing
correct.
a pure race. So this was nothing new. This was kind of the dark side of Caucasian thinking at this point, you know, in intellectual circles, that, you know, we have to have this pure race. So I think Newborough probably just incorporated that into his dogma when he was writing it at home. And I have doubts that he even wrote the book at home on his typewriter.
Yeah.
There's so many different styles of writing, and there's so many things that were copied out of other books. There's it's just a mishmash of stuff. But if I can just get your attention and hammer on you about this chapter, and if you don't go for that chapter, you'll go for this chapter. I'll just keep hammering on you. Pretty soon you'll either bite on UFOs or Bigfoot or
That's right.
some worthless idea that you can go down the rabbit hole. And it's some people recruit themselves and other people get recruited, but usually it's some cult leader taking advantage of people that have already read it, because your guard is down. You're not worried about this person being a con artist. Your guard is down. You trust him as a brother, you know, in your religion. And I wouldn't say all, but most of these very outspoken people are at some point start taking advantage of the OAHSPE student financially or sexually. It runs the gamut, you know. And there's, if you go look into these different cults that have been around since mine, it's really disturbing. Really disturbing characters, people with rape convictions. I mean, just really bad people. But they were able to recruit people because they'd already read OAHSPE and their guard was down, and they believed anything, you know, Brother Bob said.
Absolutely.
But this idea of creating a new race of people is not exclusive to OAHSPE. That was a thing that was around in the 19th century through 10 or 15 different writers. And I think it was a natural outgrowth of this scientific racism. Well, you know, that's just my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, I think that just in dealing in spaces of occultism, in your studies and even preparing for the upcoming, I believe, book that you're working on, you're partnering with another gentleman with, just the idea of how much of a problem today in today's society is, first of all, is how big is the occultic movement? And I know you can't necessarily put a physical number on it, but how widespread and how influential do you feel occultism is in, society today?
It's very big, and a lot of the ideas in OAHSPE and Blavatsky have shown up in other modern cults that are on the internet right now, and they are just cash cows because they charge like $49 to attend an online lecture by some cult leader about the beings that he's in communication with, these blonde-haired beings with blue eyes. It's always a Caucasian god that's talking to them.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so there are a lot of those, and there are a lot of one-on-one, like family cults online that have the exact same message, but they're just selling books, they're selling tapes, they're selling CDs. It's a little it's a mom and pop cash cow. But there's some really big ones like Dr. Greer that's selling UFO beings and all this stuff. He has a miniature UFO being that he reveals to you in a online video for 49 bucks. Turns out to be it was just a fetus of a child that passed away 400 years ago, and there's a lot of it going on. And there are offshoots of OAHSPE, what is that called? The Ra movement, RA, I am Ra. That was a guy named Bill Rose that was part of the UFO movement. He found OAHSPE, and he spun off, and he found some lady that was rather deranged that was channeling this raw material. And they are like representatives of the galactic universe. And if you're into science fiction, I mean, this is just like candy to you. You're talking to one of these beings. But it's just it's a watered down version of the heavens portrayed in OAHSPE. It's pretty bland and boring. But the guy was an OAHSPE student, and he figured out he had a ready audience of UFO buffs that would just eat this stuff up. He traveled around the world with this lady giving these channeled sessions, and they were making a killing. So there are a lot of groups that are channeling information, but when you really look at what they're saying, it all has that scientific racism. The beings they're talking to are all blonde with blue eyes, white skin. It's pretty dark, it's a pretty evil looking sounding universe when you really dig into their stuff. And but it's the same way. It's what about this chapter in the raw material, and if you catch them on that, they're on to another chapter. They don't want to talk about anything that makes them uncomfortable. But there is a huge audience for this stuff of people that, for some reason, they have no social life or whatever, and their whole time is spent online looking at this stuff, trying to belong to some community that's eventually going to take advantage of you. And I'll say this just to end this subject, but the group I was in had a lot of elderly retired people, and the cult leader claimed that her husband was financing this group of 24 people. Turned out she was taking the Social Security checks of all these pensioners. And not only that, a couple of the ladies were wealthy, and they were just cleaning out their bank accounts. So at some point, you're going to be taken advantage of financially if you have any source of income, And this is typical of all of these cults. They're either trying to sell you a tape, or they want you to turn over your Social Security check. I mean, that's just the way they are. That's how they get their money, And it's really sad, but you don't realize what's happened to you until you're in it for a couple of years, and then you realize, oh, I'm dead broke. I don't even have a car. I can't even get out of here if I wanted to, And you're kind of locked in until you just walk off the property.
Oh wow, yeah, and again, this is what we often find in these occultic type practices, where you turn over all of your possessions, and that somehow poverty brings you closer to godliness or holiness, and so these things are, as you said on numerous occasions, these things are um, browbeaten into people, right?
Browbeaten and bullied. Yeah.
And bully,
Yes, sir. Yes,
absolutely.
sir.
Just a brief question from our good brother, Indigenous Black Man, in the chat. He would like to ask you, if you may, um, if Newsbro, I believe he's referring to, took anything from Darwin or Galton.
He mentions Darwin. He said in OAHSPE, he says that they tell me that man is descended from an ape, but he's just sit there. That was his spin on Darwin. Galton, what was Galton's? He was scientific racism. Who was
Yeah,
Galton?
yeah, pretty much
Yeah. So the
scientific
entirety
racism.
of OAHSPE is just a different spin on the Galton scientific racism. The entire book is based on scientific racism. They just Nubero just, I call it a blender. You take something from here and something from here, and you throw it in a blender and mix it up. That's OAHSPE. So whoever wrote this, I doubt it was Nubero. Honestly, it's just a concoction. It's called synergistic religion. You take something from here, something from there. A lot
Absolutely.
of the sayings are from Hinduism. Some are from
Great point.
Buddhism. It's just a mismatch of stuff. So, but the entire basis of OAHSPE is scientific racism, in that these sacred beings came from some other universe, mated with early man, and they produced these Ihen, these little white and yellow people with straight blonde hair and blue eyes. So, once you see the scientific racism, it's all throughout the book. And
Agreed.
so Galton was already, that type of thinking, and this these different race theories, that was like what you would read in the Inquirer every day back in the 1800s. And a lot of these stories, or a lot of these features in OAHSPE, are just that day's view of Bigfoot. It was that era's Bigfoot, or UFO. Case in point, the Ihen people that were supposed to be this first white race of people.
Mm-hmm.
There was a story from Tennessee or Kentucky. I think it's called the Kentucky Pygmies. Some farmer found 2,000 graves in his farm field that were in little slate coffins, and he was selling this idea that these was a pygmy race. So they were in mound builder territory. So Nubero took this idea of these pygmies and said, well, these are the Ihens. These aren't pygmies. These are Ihens. These are the ones that built the mounds. They were the mound builders. Well, this farmer would get really upset when you pointed out that these were the bones of children. These are all children that died in infancy. And this was a sacred graveyard of infants only. Like 18,000 infants had died through some pandemic, similar to the flu or whooping cough or whatever, that went through the Native American communities. So this one area in Kentucky has, it's just a children's graveyard, and there were something like 18,000 coffins in the ground, and they opened up a few of them, sent them around, trying to prove that they were a pygmy race. And everybody that was a doctor came back and said, dude, these skeletons, they have milk teeth. They have baby's teeth. These are not adults. These are little children that died in infancy.
Wow.
And but Nubero was able to pick a BS story from here and another Bigfoot story from there and another goofy story from here. All the stuff that was in the newspaper in the time, and he just wove it into this story.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why, as I'm going through, as I was going through some of the text, as I show here on my screen, I began to realize this right away, right? And I think you may have mentioned this at some point, right? Where the Ains are clearly is a connection to the Aryan race, right? And the Thule Society and the Nazi Party. Especially when you start to look into the first book of the First Lords again, the very first through the third chapters, and then as I began to read, clearly the drugs. If I'm saying that correctly, I had just a battle with these guys, just trying to be honest about what was really in the text. These drugs that referred to or darks, and I could just see the inversion of letters, changing of vowel letters to sort of pronounce these things in a different way. But clearly, the drugs are described as dark people or as the Negro people, and then you just mentioned their fascination with the Yeti, right, or the Bigfoot, right?
Right.
And then I happened upon and look and behold, there's a creation of a group of people in the OAHSPE called the Yak people, and so, and then as I'm continuing to read, I'm looking at the term Mother Goddess, which they depict as Om or OM, and I'm like, this is just another variation of the word mom. I'm like, it's really it's almost comical it's almost comical to a degree that he would even create something or someone would even put something out that would seem to be so remedial just in its dissemination, just in its deliverance alone. I was like, I just, I was really taken aback by it. And I just had so much difficulty when I was talking to the brother the other day over on the House of Consciousness channel side of the TV, that he just wouldn't talk about it. He didn't want to talk about it. And it wasn't until I said, hey, listen, we're not going to move from this conversation. Like, tell me how the ends were being described. How were they physically being described? Oh, and he's they're not,
so it's obviously a slur on African Americans. It's obvious what they're talking about. They're talking about people with short, nappy hair. In this, I'm talking word for word. Short, nappy hair.
Word for word.
The Chosen had long, straight, blonde hair or white hair and blue eyes, and they were tall and shapely. But look at this picture to the right. There's some ladies living in the mud, and with long arms. Well, if you go back and read the Old Testament, the time before Noah left on his 3-hour tour, it talks about the Elohim, that there was some group of people creating people out of the mud. That's straight out of the Old Testament, and then they recreated it in Lord of the Rings, where those guys on the black horses, they were creating them down in this hole in the mud. That's how they were making these mud people. Well, it's very obvious that this is a racial slur against African Americans. There's no doubt about this is a really racist ideology. And they're putting the white race as godly, because when an angel mates with one of these persons on the right, they make a white person. It doesn't make a black person. It makes a white person. So when you start pressing people on this, they want to change the subject. They don't want to talk about it because it very distinctly says they had long arms, they had short nappy hair, and you know exactly this is a racist that wrote this thing. And now whether
Absolutely.
Newborough was that creative and wrote it, or he got this manuscript from somebody else, to me, I would swear there was 15 authors that threw this thing together.
Yeah.
And you know, I don't pretend to know where it came from, but everything I look at in this book is something dark and evil. And
Yeah.
it's not a place you want to go. It's you know, it really appeals to somebody who hasn't read the Old Testament, who hasn't read the Bible. If you're just
Absolutely.
fresh and new, you know, out of elementary school or high school, you haven't read a lot of books, and somebody comes around, starts pounding this into you, it may seem like it makes sense. But if you look at our history and the time it was written and the scientific racism and prejudices that were going on, you immediately see that this is something evil. I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
It's just a really dark book, and it's very racist. And it's also racist against Native Americans, even more so, because this idea that the mound builders were white, well, right away, you're taking away the culture of Native Americans, and you're saying the mound builders were not Native Americans. You're saying they were white people. So it's the same Hamitic hypothesis going on here. These white colonizers realized that, hey, the Indians have all this land. They have all of these natural resources. If we can sell this story, now this is something that was going on before OAHSPE, but the story was, if we can sell people on this idea that the mound builders were white, then we have a natural right to these lands that the Indian occupied. The story was in 1828 was the Native Americans, the red man, came after these white people that built the mounds, and that the red man killed off these white mound builders and took over their lands. That was the actual story, and that story was quoted by Andrew Jackson when he signed the Indian Removal Act. So you look back in history, there was some really dark periods in our American history of terrible things done to African Americans, you know, kidnapping, slavery, and then removing all the Native Americans from their ancestral homelands. And some of them been there for 12,000 years. They just pulled a gun on them and said, "You're going with us," and they ended up in Oklahoma. So all of these stories that backed up that Indian Removal Act are in OAHSPE. Plus a lot of racism, you know.
Plus a lot of it. Yeah, and it's a direct, and as you said, it's a direct correlation to the times.
Absolutely, yes.
And we can clearly see it. And so for anyone that is able just to understand that simplistically, it just blows this whole idea of these ethereal beings coming and sharing 24,000 years of history with
but
with
man has
right?
been around. Mankind has been around for 1.2 billion years.
Absolutely.
And you're trying to tell me we just woke up 20,000 years ago? It's like an old New Testament that says the earth is 4,000 years old. It's just it's really out of date. But
exactly.
You know, you just mentioned this story about the Etherians mating with man, the so-called story in OAHSPE. Well, that was a different spin on that story was Blavatsky, and that story was popular in Germany, and that story was picked up by Thule Society, which became the German Workers' Society, which became the Nazi Party. So these racial ideas had a basis in Blavatsky, and Newborough just happened to, you know, there was different racial theories all over the place that were incorrect, in 1881. He just happened to latch on either Blavatsky or somebody similar, and he invented his own spin on it and brought in these angels to give the whole book a religious bent. And there you go. But the Blavatsky had a very definite impact on German ideology starting back in 1921 when they first started, and that involved into these extremist racial ideas by 1933 in Germany, and when Hitler came to power.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's a lot of people, if they were just familiar with just basic, just basic history of the times. I often talk about in some of my other presentations I have done previously about how much the Aryan movement acculturated certain archaeological discoveries, specifically the discovery of the city of Troy. And as they go into the city of Troy, they see what became to be known with the Nazi Party, the swastika. But we know that it was a circle, or they call it a circle, or sort of like this cross. Where this image was found in the city of Troy. It's found in India, and so with the Vedic and the Sanskrit writings, they wanted to create this Aryan type of language that no one at the time had ever seen before, and that it was superior to all other language. So in their attempt to promote Aryanism, right, on a racial level, scientific racial level, they began to appropriate and acculturate the discovery of the city of Troy and all of these different things. And a lot of this stuff came through the Thule Society, came through it filtered in through the Nazi Party. So by the time we get to Hitler, now you see this whole founding of a political party based on occultism, based on all of these workings of Blavatsky, where we know Hitler himself was a reader, an avid reader of Blavatsky and these different types of people.
I did not know that. I did not know that.
Yeah.
But this Nazi story is them creating a creation myth of how they're the superior race. Well, absolutely. This is also WOAHSPE is another creation myth for the white
absolutely.
people. It's not
absolutely.
African Americans are way down on the food chain in this book, and they don't understand that this book is talking bad about them, and it's not and they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about these people with the long blonde hair and the blue eyes. They don't want to talk about the where it places African Americans with short nappy hair. They don't want to talk about it because then it makes them very uncomfortable, and then they're going to have to start examining all over their whole belief system, because that's not right. That's absolutely. A lie. But you don't realize that unless you know something about scientific racism. And I honestly did not know anything about it until like 3 years ago. And that's when I put two and two together and say, this whole book is scientific racism. There's no part that's not,
There's no part that's not.
That's correct. And the people that subscribe to this ideology are just like me 3 years ago. I hadn't even heard the term scientific racism. And I started looking into it and these different authors and everything. And I said, dude, that's right out of a WOAHSPE. It's just a little bit different spin, but it's right out of WOAHSPE. And, I didn't realize how bad it was until I learned about scientific racism. And it's just, but it's all starts with that Hermetic hypothesis
Hermetic
from the
hypothesis.
Bible.
Absolutely.
So somebody
Absolutely.
took that Bible story in Europe and said to themselves, well, we got to get those minerals in Africa. Let's make those Hamitic people,
Absolutely.
let's make them white, not black. We'll make them white.
Absolutely.
And then we'll have a hereditary right to these minerals.
Yes.
It's all about stealing stuff.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And that's it. And that's it. I said, I agree with you. And so I don't know if you can see my screen, but here's one of the sources that I have. It's called Hyperborean Atlantis, right? And we touched on that. We see some semblance of that in the OAHSPE as well, right? This belief in this utopian society that existed somewhere out, in the ocean, right? So this Hyperion Atlantis.
Yeah, it's the exact same story.
Yeah,
different words.
Yeah,
but it was Newborough claimed there was a continent in the Pacific Ocean. I mean, just to be different. But that was, if you look in the newspaper and old books printed before 1881, that was a huge discussion in pop culture. That these Hawaiian islands must be the tips of mountains that got sunk at some time. So people could buy into this stuff really easy. And this Hyperion, Hyperborean Atlantis, that's the Blavatsky's second race of people. The first one died off. This is the second race who lived on they were like these monks that lived on Atlantis. And they fled, the island sunk. Well, Newborough just took that story and ran with it. So he incorporated this story straight from Blavatsky. He just changed the names and the location.
That's
all. It's the exact same story.
Yep,
and this is what Heinrich Himmler of the SS, the Nazi SS, he took this story. And in the Hyperborean Atlantis, these are people from the north, from the land of fire and ice. And they incorporated that into a Nordic creation myth.
That's right.
And they came up with the basis for the Aryan race, not from India, but from Norway and the North Pole. Right. There was this mythical land of fire and ice. That's verbatim what they called it. And that was the Nazi creation myth. And Newborough just heard a similar version, and he put the island in the Pacific, but it's still the same sinking of the continent, the migration of these holy white people with straight blonde hair and blue eyes. That was his version. But the Nazis were all this Nordic race supposedly was all blonde hair and blue eyes. Well, blonde hair and blue eyes come from the Mediterranean down in Ukraine. Didn't come from Norway, Sweden. The blonde people came there later, so they can't even get their story right.
Absolutely.
The blonde, blue-eyed people came from Ukraine and some of those Slavic countries.
Absolutely.
Long after they had kings and queens in Norway, Scotland, and Sweden, those Ukrainian people came and conquered those areas, took over the royal family, and they became the kings. So, none of these stories make sense. But if I can hammer a couple of chapters of it from OAHSPE onto you over coffee, I can make it sound like it's real. But if you know something about scientific racism, you'll know it's all a big bunch of hogwash. It's not true.
Absolutely. Well, what's again? I really appreciate you coming on. We've been going out. Almost 2 hours. We've been on since noon. It's
wow.
It's 2 o'clock hour. Yeah. And I just appreciate you coming on. And I would like at some later time for you to come on so we can continue different discussions on occultism and really dealing with it. I think this is something that our people.
Really I think it's a much bigger problem than anything to do with OAHSPE. It's more widespread.
Yeah, absolutely.
But when
So
you burrow down, it's the same techniques.
same techniques.
Yeah, same
Absolutely.
technique, same story, you know. But
Absolutely.
it was
Absolutely.
really a pleasure coming on. It is only the second time I've ever spoken about this to anybody, and um, just trying to set the record straight of this group's history.
Sure.
And
Sure. Absolutely.
like I say, today I have friends that are faithists, and I'm on good terms with them.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
you know, there's certain things we can't talk about because it's going to start pointing in a bad direction towards it, you know. And you've seen the
Yeah.
same thing the other night. So, but I'd be happy to come on again anytime. Let me know. You have my
Yeah.
contact
Absolutely.
information.
Absolutely. I have your contact information. Is there some social media where you would like to share where people can reach out to you? If you have, I would like to send you something. So I don't know if you have Cash App or anything like that, if you have any type of means of like that, but if not, any donations I get in, I'll send to you as well. So I do
No, no,
appreciate you
no, no,
coming on.
absolutely
Appreciate
not.
the
No, you're not
time.
giving me anything. You take that and you take that
Okay.
into your community where you live.
Okay. I
Don't
appreciate
bother
that.
with
I
me.
appreciate that.
Yeah, I
I
think you're doing
appreciate that.
you know, you seem to be the most fairest or equal-handed person out there to interview me. There's a lot of people with some kind of agenda, and I don't know. I heard you speak on that evening program with Sonetta, and I thought you were very well spoken and very even-handed. So, and you know, you're not flying off the handle and screaming at me.
Yeah, well, good, bad, or indifferent. Whether we agree or disagree. At the end of the day, I think we all want to be, or we should strive to be, on the side of what is right, and true and just to a degree, especially when it comes to information and educating people in regards to these issues. So I think that we have to have conversations, right? And the art of conversation is something that's being attacked, and it's an art form that's being lost, just to be able to communicate and discuss different ideas and exchanges
That's right. That's right.
without that, right? So this is the only true way that historians and scholars and scientists and people of faith, all walks of faith, can really come to an understanding, even though we may not come to an agreeable consensus, but we can all come to an understanding about what it is that we all represent, and that makes it easier for us to communicate and get closer to the truth, right? Of many different things. So you're welcome on the show anytime. I'm definitely going to be reaching out to you again, because I do want to hold a different conversation with you, strictly dealing with occult, dealing with the occult and
Right.
different things of that nature, and not just specifically a WOSPE. This is just one stop on our way to a larger, bigger, and more in-depth topics. And so again, Woodson, I appreciate you coming on
Thank
and
you.
spending this much time with us. I hope you found it pleasant. I didn't want to, I just wanted you, I felt like you had much more of a story to share that could be edifying and helpful to our community and to others. And so, again, I appreciate you coming on for that and sharing with us on today. So that's it. We're going to wrap it up. We're at the top of the 2:00 hour. Shout out to everybody who joined us on today. Again, please like, share, subscribe if you haven't to this channel. We're going to be doing, various interviews, on specific topics, and whether people agree with me or not, right? That's not the purpose that I'm having, bringing people on, but we really want to get to some type of understanding where we can all glean from and grow and help us in our day-to-day in our day-to-day lives, how we can, take the information that we glean and make it practical and relative today. So again, peace and blessings to your family. Now I'm going to, I'm going to go spend some time with my family. I hope everybody else is out there spending time with yours, whatever it is you have planned today. So that's it. Peace and blessings to you, Woodson.
God bless you too, and your family.
Same to you.
All right. My pleasure today.
All right, no doubt. So again, family, that was Brother Woodson PAYNE. Very pleasant guest. I thought it was very thought-provoking, very helpful. There's some things that I think that, doesn't almost require any further debating on the topic, because this concludes our 3-part series on dealing with the OAHSPE faith and faithist movement, burgeoning, re-burgeoning of the movement, that I think that people really need to be aware of, because things, as we see, sound good on the surface, but it doesn't take much just to scratch underneath just a little bit to really see the true shade and the true understanding of what's really going on. And sometimes we can teach and give our opinion and read from various articles and read various things, but sometimes you need people who've actually been in the trenches to give you their understanding and to talk to you and to relate to you about what's actually happening, what's going on. And I said, I believe that in my research, there was another gentleman's name was mentioned in the chat. I believe his name was Bear, that also has done some work in regards to the OAHSPE literature and the faithist movement. But from what I understood and the information that I was able to vet, our dear brother Woodson PAYNE has been spot on and direct. His information checks out and strictly dealing with that. And so, again, we appreciate him coming on. And so, please, family, if you guys missed our Pillar of Fire by Night series, we started with brother KOT on last night. Y'all missed it. The promises and the seed. The promises and the seed. Our Pillar of Fire by Night show aired. Also, look for. I don't know if I'm going to do it next week or not. I have to confirm with Sanetta on the channel as well. And I think I'm gonna be taking a little break from that particular platform for a minute, and so we can focus more on our edification and building over here after a presentation on the dealing with the assassination of Dr. Alberta Williams King, the mother of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., as well as A.D. King as well, and his mysterious death and the untimely death of MLK Jr. And her assassination, their mother. We're going to be talking about the making of a Black Messiah and the Hebrew Israelite connection. I've done it on this channel before, but I'm going to do it again for the month of February. And we're just going to go into that. If you have any questions or any concerns, please feel free to email me. Right? Please feel free to email me at speaknazareth@gmail.com for any questions that you may have, any topics that you may want to talk about. Brother KOT and I talked about that on yesterday. We want to deal with some of the hard topics and information. I'm going to be sharing a series coming up real soon. I'm going to be sharing a series coming up real soon. Let me see if I can show you guys just really well. Coming up real soon. Let me go out of this one. And I'm going to be talking about, come on. I'm going to be talking about Abraham. I'm going to be talking about I'm going to be talking about human sacrifice and child sacrifice in the Bible, right? And we're going to be going into that, and we're going to be talking about, does God condone it? We're going to be talking about the topics of the death and killing of what seems to be children in the Bible, what many attribute to the Most High. Did he command the death of little children in the Bible? We're going to be talking about that in the next upcoming series that we do. Indigenous Black man. He says, I did a bill on Dr. Joy DeGruy, post-traumatic slave syndrome. I would love for you to present over here with that. I caught bits and pieces of it, but I would love for you to present that over here, Indigenous Black man, post-traumatic slave syndrome. I would love to for you to share that with us as well. But let me show this real quick. Right. We're going to be talking about Yahweh commands killing of the wicked. Yahweh does not command the murder of the innocent. So we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about that in earnest. We're going to be talking about whether the Most High commanded Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac. We're going to be talking about and we did that in a series earlier, talking about Japheth. Actually, KOT and I already talked about the binding ritual, the sacrifice of Isaac. All right. We also talked about Japheth and his daughter. Was she truly sacrificed? We talked about that. We're going to deal with that as well. I got some new information on that as well. And we're going to be talking about human sacrifice. The Israelites perform human sacrifice in the Bible. And what did the scriptures say about it, right? We're going to be talking about that, how prevalent was, how much of there's a different term when not pandemic, not epidemic, but there's another term when it deals with when something is just spread completely, I think completely worldwide, right, at a particular period of time. We're going to talk about the practice of child sacrifice and human sacrifice throughout the time, going back at least dating 1200 BCE, from the time most people would like to date the Exodus from 1200 BCE up until today. So we're going to cover that span of time and talk about the issue of human sacrifice and child sacrifice and what the biblical narrative says, dealing with extra biblical sources. We're going to deal with that topic. That's the next up and coming series we're going to be doing. So please look out for that. Look for the notifications on this channel at El Diara. And so he said, just present the video on here. All I need to mention is where you got it, brother. I appreciate it. I will definitely do that. I appreciate that. And so we're going to be talking about those different things that people like to use to go against the Bible, right? People wanted to talk about, was your God what is it? a killer of babies, right? There's a term that they use for it. So we're going to talk about all of that coming up. But again, I appreciate for all of you who tuned in. Again, I appreciate you again, Brother Woodson Payne. I'm definitely going to have you back on. So please look for an email from me. We can set up some more things and deal with some more topics in regards to occultism. And we're going to close this thing out, man. Again, all praises to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to Yeshua, Mashiach, who showed us how to walk out the Torah circumspectly. And so, again, you be blessed, man. Y'all, man, love. Listen, go hug your family members, man. Go hug your children. Go hug your significant others. Go hug your daughters. Go hug your sons. And if you don't have any of those things around you, go find a mirror, dust it off, and hug yourself. Right? Hug yourself, man. Go love on somebody, man. Because if you sow a seed of love, man, trust me, it will come back to you. So even if you love on yourself, that's going to come back to you. Go sow the seed, right? Go sow the seed of love. Peace and blessings, family. Shalom.
You could try to play, but you're never gonna beat me. Look the other way, what I'm doing ain't easy. Bloody hands stained from the people who deceive me. Muddy hands break through the chains, go free me. Looking for change, looking for pain, pulling a mob, pushing a train. I'll never stop, stick to a lane, pick up the pieces and go rearrange. I'll be the best above all the rest, put me to the test, expect nothing less, you check as I'm chess, what's happening next, He got the venom, a tangible weapon, no coming in second. This life is a lesson, he got a new engine from pain, it's a blessing. New focus, no guessing, just bold and obsession, all in his possession. You got their attention, I'll leave an impression and take your redemption. Just kill, no discretion, your mind is a weapon. 11-11, it's time for progression. You could try to play, but you're never gonna beat me. Look the other way, what I'm doing ain't easy. Bloody hands stained from the people who deceive me. Muddy hands break through the chains, go free me. People like